Hi folks, let's talk bananas. This is all the fruit, and I'm in the best place to talk bananas. I'm on the island of Tenerife on the Canary Islands, a place famous or infamous depending on how you want to see it, for its banana production. I think Tenerife might be the biggest banana producer in all of the EU. Well, the bananas. All the modern commercially important bananas, internationally commercially important bananas, are of the Cavendish variety. It's Musa acuminata or Musa paradisiaca or Musa cavendishi, but definitely the Cavendish variety. Where does this mysterious Cavendish variety come from? Well, around the 1830s, Lord Cavendish or Duke Cavendish, some British noblemen, received a bunch of banana plants from some priest, I think, from some British priest, and nobody really knows where they come from. Do they come from Asia, from the Pacific? Do they even come from the Canary Islands? Well, about 15 years later, after he had cultivated and multiplied them in his greenhouses, in the 1850s, he sent a lot of them to the Pacific. That much is known. Where the bananas come from and where they ended up, it's not exactly sure. And how did the bananas come to the Canary Islands? Nobody knows either. What we know is they originated in Southeast Asia, on islands like Borneo and Sumatra. There are tons and tons of wild species. I've made a couple videos about wild Borneo bananas. There are also lots of continental wild bananas in Southeast Asia. They definitely started their cultivation from there, Southeast Asia, most probably the islands or somewhere, wherever, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam. From there, they spread through parts of the Pacific via the Polynesian sailors. They spread to India, or maybe somewhere even domesticated around the Indian subcontinent. The Arabs, they spread Islam from Arabia to Southeast Asia, and they brought bananas from Southeast Asia to Arabia. But it's possible that early Polynesian Asian sailors already brought the banana from Asia to Madagascar. From there it spread through tropical Africa into West Africa. Where did the bananas in Tenerife and the Canary Islands come from? Well, we don't know. One theory is that those are some of the Cavendish bananas from Lord Cavendish's greenhouse in Britain. That while they were transported to the Pacific Islands, well, the ships in the 19th century, they used to stop on the Canary Islands or Madeira or the Azores. It's possible that they left a couple plants here because the climate here seemed favorable for the bananas. It's also possible that the African bananas, which came from Asia to Madagascar and from there to Central and West Africa, were transported by the Portuguese to those islands, Canaries, Madeira, Azores. It's even possible that the bananas were directly transported from Africa to South America, and from there they came back to the Canary Islands. What I think is that it's possible that the Arabs, when they brought bananas from Asia to Arabia, they spread them all the way through North Africa and Spain. Remember, in the first couple centuries, basically all of the Arabian world was one giant country, reaching from Arabia all the way to Spain. After the Reconquista, the Spanish inherited a lot of agricultural techniques and also plant species from the Arabs or from the Moriscos. It's possible that the banana was one of them. There is a bit of small-scale Cavendish cultivation in southern Andalusia, but nothing on a commercial scale. Well, we don't really know where the bananas came on the Canary Islands. We know that, well, in the 19th century, they were sitting around here. A couple of them were cultivated in gardens and farms, but they were not such an important crop. Well, and then we get those British lords and captains again. They would arrive from all over the world to the Canary Islands with their ships. The ships, when they were sailboats, well, they were a lot lighter when they arrived to the Canary Islands, a lot less food and a lot less water, and not many heavy things to transport from the Canary Islands. Later, the steamboats, they had already used up most of their coal when they arrived to the Canary Islands, so there was a lot of empty space in those ships, and those British, they like money. I mean, they invented capitalism and industrialization, so they did not like this empty space. So first they started cultivating tomatoes in the Canary Islands, tomatoes in winter in Europe. That was quite an amazing thing back then. But later they realized, well, tomatoes, people know tomatoes in summer. Tomatoes in winter can be sold quite expensively, but something they cannot cultivate in Europe, bananas. You can sell them for a lot more money throughout the year because they are much more exotic than tomatoes. So they started growing bananas and transporting them to Britain and then again to other European countries because other Europeans also wanted to eat bananas. Well, at first the bananas were cultivated on the northern slopes of the islands. For example, here the Valle di Orotava, one of the most fertile and water-rich areas on the Canary Islands, one of the most valuable agricultural land. This used to be big banana cultivation areas, but just up to like 300 meters, because over 300 meters on the northern slopes of the Canary Islands, it's just too cold for bananas. Actually, it's too cold for bananas everywhere on the Canary Islands, to be honest. When temperatures drop under 15 degrees, they stop growing. If it drops even a little bit further, they get damaged. As you can see, wind damages them. Those here are growing in the open, and they have to be supported by wires. Well, the solution to a lot of those problems was to introduce the Dwarf Cavendish. This pretty stocky banana. Here those are quite tall because I guess they are getting a lot of nutrients and water. They are getting a lot of support from those wires. But they are still shorter than average giant Cavendish bananas. So quite stocky bananas with quite short petioles and leaf sheets. And this is good. I mean, shorter bananas means you waste less biomass on a tall pseudostem, and you are much more stable against wind damage and stuff like that. So the short Cavendish banana got commercially used here on the Canary Islands on the north sides. Why on the north sides? Well, here there was the water, here there were the people who could cultivate them, and here were the bigger harbors. Well, in later decades, people realized, oh wait, on the southern coasts of those islands, there is a lot more sun and a lot more heat. Bananas can grow much better there. And this land on the southern coast of the islands is basically worthless. You can have it for pennies. Basically, you can get the land almost for free. Sometimes you can even get it for free. Like, people will be happy if you come and cultivate the worthless deserts on the southern coastlines of the islands. So giant channel systems were constructed, basically transporting the water from the north side of the islands dozens of kilometers around steep mountains to the southern side of the islands. Also, giant gallerias or mines were drilled up to 5 kilometers into the mountains, and what they were mining was not gold or gems or iron, but water. Basically, wells were not enough. You cannot drill a 5 kilometer deep well with normal technology, but they could drill 5 kilometer deep mines, 5 kilometers into the volcano, into horrible heat, to extract water. And on the southern coasts of the islands, the bananas were growing much faster. They were producing much sweeter fruit, and everybody was happy except for the incredible water loss and for the incredible salinization, because, yeah, the soil became saline because of all the evaporation. So they started introducing greenhouses on the southern sides of the islands. Those revolutionized agriculture again. You could produce a lot more bananas or other stuff with the same amount of water. The temperature got even higher. The humidity in the greenhouses was higher. In the greenhouses, you could even cultivate giant Cavendish. On the southern slopes of the island, there are very few greenhouses, but on the northern slopes of the island, like around here, there are very few greenhouses. The bananas are usually cultivated outdoors. On the southern slopes, you can cultivate them up to like 450 meters commercially, and you use a lot more greenhouses. Well, now let's look at the bananas cultivated here. I already said the Dwarf Cavendish. It's not called dwarf because the fruit are small. It's called dwarf because the plant is usually shorter than the giant Cavendish. Those fruit here, if you look at them, well, they are not completely ripe. They look a bit like they're on the smallish side. Here I bought some in the supermarket. And yeah, they are smaller like the average giant Cavendish banana you will get in Europe. They can get bigger. This is more or less the normal size you'll get. They can get bigger. They can get like this big. They can also be really small because here they sell everything. If you're in Europe, they will introduce just a very specific size range of bananas. Actually, Chiquita, the biggest banana company, invented a different brand, Console, to sell its slightly smaller bananas because Chiquita, despite being called the little one, like really the little banana, Chiquita bananas need to be really big, and that's why they sell the small bananas they harvest or buy as Console bananas. But the Dwarf Cavendish here in the Canary Islands is on average a little bit smaller, just a little bit smaller than giant Cavendish bananas. They also look different. They are usually stockier. Look at those bananas. They are both quite plump and stocky. This is basically thin. The banana is thin, but it tapers to a really thick end. This banana is quite plump and stocky, and it also tapers to quite a thick end. The giant Cavendish we get in most of Europe and America doesn't have such a big... This is the spot where the flower is attached. So they are usually a bit shorter. They are stockier and plumper, and the tip is, this trace of the flower is a lot bigger. Well, there are a few other differences in how the brown spots develop on the banana and stuff like that. Those seem to have more brown spots, they say, despite the fact that I've rarely seen brown spots. They need longer to ripen and so on. I'm not so sure about those properties of the bananas, but they are definitely on average shorter and definitely stockier. The flesh is slightly more yellow than in the giant Cavendish, and it's sweeter and more aromatic, and that's a fact. Those are not 100% ripe, so they taste not that extremely sweet. But basically, this banana is up to 20% sweeter than giant Cavendish varieties. Also more aromatic. Well, it's become very important for Canary Island identity, especially on islands like Tenerife, La Gomera and La Palma, which are the main producers. It's been heavily subsidized by Spain for many decades. Now the EU kind of almost stopped the subsidies, which increased the price of the bananas about by 100% just in a couple years. The banana cultivation is using too much water, and the Canary Islands are actually a little bit too cold for cultivating bananas. So I'm glad if the large-scale banana cultivation is replaced, at least partially, with cultivation of wine and some more exotic fruit. But still, I'm sure that the Dwarf Cavendish banana will be with us for future decades and centuries. By the way, Dwarf Cavendish, well, those are several Cavendish varieties which are marketed under the name of Canary Island banana. They are kind of different from the giant Cavendish varieties, which are the commercial bananas of the rest of the world. But the distinction is not like 100% strict. Those are just clones of different bananas. So giant Cavendish and dwarf Cavendish, yeah, there is a difference between them, but it's not really exact science. So folks, this was a short overview of the history of the Canary Island banana. Here again, nice bananas in the sunset, nice banana plants in the sunset at the hotel, although I'm sure that they will harvest the fruit once they are big enough. Stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the parks and gardens of the Canary Islands. I'm glad nobody here came and asked me if I have stolen those bananas from the garden. And folks, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.